Hello on the rockers. On this episode, maybe it's God telling us something. On this episode, we're going to Yassify your faith with the host of Yass Jesus podcast, actor and comedian Daniel Franzese. Of course, we love him for Mean Girls and HBO's Looking. And former televangelist and conversion therapy survivor Azariah Southworth is here, who claim you don't have to pick between gay and God. And me, your favorite host with the sassy most. I have a lot to say. And as a former Catholic and fresh atheist, I got questions. Raise a glass, get out the holy water, and let the drinks begin. It's on the rocks.
Thank you for being.
Life is a banquet, and most poor suckers are starving to death.
I'd like to propose a toast.
This is On the Rocks with Alexander, where I drink with your favorite celebrities as we talk about fashion, entertainment, pop culture, reality TV, and, well, that's about it. So pop a cork, lean back, and raise a glass to On the Rocks.
Fasten your seatbelt. It's going to be a bumpy night.
There we go. Buns and Bows and Pantyhose on the Rocks podcast, a place where we're too glad to give a damn. Apparently, I'm already sinning left and right. Okay, we've never done a trigger warning on the show, but somebody told me that we should because we're going to be talking about experiences with religion, faith, conversion therapy, possible church abuse. But I promise we're going to keep it light and boozy. I don't know how. Does that even make sense? And I have my own personal thoughts and experiences with religion, also extensive formal education in religion, which no one really knows that aspect of my life. I was obsessed with learning the real history of Western and Eastern religions at Chapman University under some very well-noted scholars who are frequently seen on the History Channel and CNN specials. I went to Israel for 2 weeks in search of my faith. Having the opportunity to visit many of the holy sites after hours, celebrating Mass as a cantor. And beforehand, I went to Catholic school all my life, from grade school through high school. I concurrently sang at 3 Catholic churches in Southern California as a lead cantor for 13 years. Let me say that again, 13 years of service to 3 different Catholic churches at the same time. After some things I saw, and after being asked to leave my position as a cantor because I inadvertently kissed my person I was dating during Easter service on the cheek, I was asked to leave. And after some life traumatic experiences, I'm no longer Catholic nor religious. My mother, raised Catholic all her life, walked out when an after-Mass rosary group was praying for the conversion of gay people. Do I have faith? I don't know. Do I believe in life after death? I don't know. Do I believe in a guy upstairs? No. Do I support other people's faith? Yes. Do I respect religion and the people who need it? Sometimes. Does anyone have all the answers? No. Do I still love talking about religion? Yes. Am I more than excited about today's episode? Yes. Okay. Like I put yes in there. Our guests today are from the host of Yass Jesus podcast, freshly nominated by GLAAD for Exceptional Podcast. It is a faith and sexuality affirming comedy podcast that believes you don't have to pick between gay and God. Of course, we know Daniel from entertainment, but in Hebrew, his name means God is my judge. He lived his life knowing the meaning of his name would carry him through missions as a dedicated member of his Pentecostal church. As he discovered he was queer, his journey became a little bit more complicated. I think we've all been there. At 21, he checked himself into conversion therapy just as he began his acting career. Terrified and closeted, he went on to play the iconic gay teen Damien in Mean Girls. You know, just something subtle there. That's all. He came out publicly on the film's 10th anniversary, which we've all celebrated. We love and know him from a number of screen projects, including the groundbreaking and maybe a little bit before its time, HBO's Looking. He's the creator of several live comedy shows and one-man stand-up performances. He's an LGBTQ activist and an ambassador for the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation. As part of his legacy, he wants LGBTQ persons to hear the message he so desperately needed to hear himself. No one can take God away from you. I agree with that, and I would also put, nobody can take carbs away from you if you don't want them to. Please welcome Daniel.
Hello. Hi.
Also welcome Azariah, a former Instinct Magazine's leading man of the year. I think I remember that issue. I think my left hand remembers that issue. Personally a GLAAD Award-nominated podcast host, as we mentioned. He started as a Christian TV personality and producer for the TBN, NRB, and VTN networks after coming out in 2008. And we have to remember, it sounds like, 2008 is pretty near. We have to remember the climate in 2008. And consequently fired from those networks. No. Azariah went on the road with the Soul Force Equality Right to advocate for the rights and safety of LGBTQ students at Christian universities. He's continued his advocacy through writing, public speaking, and of course with his podcast, Yass, Jesus. Southworth is devoted to sharing the liberating love of God through media. Please welcome Azariah.
Hello.
Okay, where to start? And I have to say, like, I have a lot of respect for all different points of view in terms of religion and faith. I have my own certain, and a lot of the questions that you all sent in, I will be presenting, not to be rude, whatever, to be devil's advocate. Haha, get it, devil's advocate. Okay, there we go. 40 days, 40 nights. But also to keep the conversation going, because I think it's such an important conversation, especially in today's climate with religion kind of leading politics. It's like, isn't that what we escaped? Anyway, but just ease into it. I need to know, because you guys are besties. How did you guys meet?
It was a dark alley.
I believe it was Vaseline Alley. No,
Oh, rest in peace.
no Azariah came on a bad date, I guess, to one of my comedy shows, and then
Yeah.
liked me and my friends. And we were like, oh, all of us are going to be at this next place, next week. And so he followed me from the Comedy Store to Flappers, and then afterwards said hi. And I said, come out and have drinks with us, and the rest is history.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the kind of person you are, though. You're just like,
True.
very
Yeah,
welcoming,
like
and
this,
it's
come on. He was like, oh, I'm new in town. I was like, well, come join us. Come have drinks.
Yeah, he's very welcoming, very, come chill, come hang out. And I did, and
Yeah.
we connected.
And
so.
the vibes were exquisite.
Yes.
Now, we know in LA this happens a lot. We're like, oh, come party, 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 party. When did it click? And you're like, oh, this is an actual real friend.
Gosh, I mean, Danny's been there when I've needed him,
Yeah, I don't even know. As
And
he's
I
been
hope
the
vice
same.
versa,
Yeah.
And I think when he was there, when it felt like the ground was falling out underneath me
Well, it did.
at times, is when I was like, this is a friend, and that is a friend.
Yeah.
So that,
Especially in LA. Keep them close.
Whenever I need anything, it's Ozzy's the first person I go to, and he never says no, and he never has like a chip on his shoulder about it, and I try to repay that whenever I can, and I think we're good friends because of that reason.
yeah.
God damn, I need a good friend. Tell me about this bad date, though.
Oh,
There's
God.
nothing worse than being on a bad date at a comedy club because you're sitting there miserable. You're having to do your drink minimum. Unless it's Daniel or somebody very talented. Some of the acts are not whatever. And you're just like, motherfucker, let's finish this night.
It was one of those dates where it's like you're on your third date and they're telling you, I love you. And you're just not there because.
So you told him and he ran. Third date, I love you?
No. Yeah, it was. When looking back, it was very cringeworthy, and I allowed him to stay longer than I should have. But it was one of those cringeworthy dates.
Delicious.
So, yeah.
How did the talk of religion come about? I've been friends with people for 12 years. Never talked about religion. Always say, like, what are you doing for Christmas? Oh, going out, going to the family. That's been the extent of religion talk.
Probably with Azzy, because Azzy's experience with entertainment is extensive. Working at TBN, getting fired, all of that other stuff was extremely interesting to me. And I grew up Pentecostal, so I think we got to that pretty quickly. What really happened was I think we were smoking weed and just talking about God sometimes, and just like we call it Bible wondering.
Yeah.
And like we're like, man, people should be hearing some of these conversations. Like we should really be like telling other people these conversations. And I had been thinking for a long time about having my next podcast be like a theological kind of like exploration for queer people. And as he was like right along with that. So when I had an opportunity to pitch podcasts, well, at first I was on this podcast called Guys We Fucked, which is like these two amazing women.
Leads into religion so easily.
Yeah, I thought I was going to get to talk about sex. They have people on all the time, like Amber, all these great people talk about sex.
Sex
I'm like, oh, I'm going to
positive.
get to talk about blowjobs. I'm excited. And, people don't often ask me about my sexual side. So I was eager to talk about that. But they were like, so you're a queer Christian. What does that mean? And then they broke it down on that podcast. And then I get an overwhelming amount of DMs. Like, I know when something hits, whether it was like Mean Girls or Italian Mom or one of my things like hits, like I end up getting like a whole bunch of messages. And this was one of those things that just hit a nerve for people. And people just couldn't stop talking about it. Anyone who listens to the podcast DM'd me. And pretty soon I said, give me your email. I'm going to have a new podcast coming out. And when I collected 100 emails, I was like, now I'm going to go pitch it and say I have 100 people that will automatically listen to this podcast. Like,
getting an email nowadays, it's like getting 10,000 signatures, just
Right.
that one email.
Yeah.
And I have to say, Daniel, I've known you for years. I've known about your career. I'm a huge fan. I've followed you, throughout the years, and I never knew this aspect of you.
but do you think I'm a nice guy?
I think you're a wonderfully nice guy.
Yeah, you think I have a good spirit?
I think you have a good spirit. I
Well,
think
that's-
you're very down to earth.
That's God with me. That's God with me.
I also think you're a party animal. I also think you also enjoy sex. And so for me, we have such a stigma on both sides of whatever side fence you are on religion. If we built religion as this staunch fence, which is what's happening in America, it's like the gay people, what I would consider, it would take a leap of faith for you to be like, okay, I'm going to do this whole podcast and I'm going to come out as Christian. That's a little dangerous to me.
Yeah.
Whereas the other side, you see being very Christian coming out as gay. It's like it's such a dichotomy.
Well, I think two things. One, I had a promise to God. I always said to God that if I could just be in the closet and be an actor, when I finally came out, like my platform would be that God loves gay people too. But that's not how it happened. My platform was more about like the gay glass ceiling in Hollywood and how that affected me. It just sort of naturally how that happened. So I still had like this little itch, and I kept doing things like I wrote for Attitude Magazine and I wrote an article about it, and I wrote for Bear World Magazine and I wrote an article about it. But none of those were hitting. None of those were really like I think getting the kind of attention that I was trying to say, because I feel like me and Azzy talk about this all the time. Obviously, we have a podcast about it, but queer people are meant to make that choice between gay and God. And it's like I ask you, like, what's your most prized possession? Like, what's something that if there was a fire, your favorite thing you own or have?
I mean, it sounds cheesy, but it'd probably be like family albums of pictures I haven't scanned.
Sure. Or like, some people say their pet or like, their Louis Vuitton
pet.
bag or anything like that, right? Well, I'm just saying, like, something
I
that
take
they
the
love.
bags under my eyes. Those are my Louis Vuittons, okay?
But I asked you, like, can I have those albums? Like, would you give them to me, or would you give me that stuff? Like, you'd be like, no.
Yeah.
Like, because that's mine. But as soon as we say, oh, we're gay, people are like, well, I want your God. And you're like, fine, take it. I feel like we give up God too easily. And, God is, for a lot of people, a moral center. It's like, I have one of those, I have weird analogies, but I have one of those vases that like are magnetic. They like hover over the.
I'm obsessed with them. They
They're
have like
so
a
cool.
Death Star Wars one. 'Cause I'm
Yes.
such a nerd, and I'm just like, and everything I'll like flick it. It'd be like testing its faith.
For me, without God, my thing's completely off that orbit. I don't float. Like I'm like off the orbit of that magnetic pull.
Okay, so let's peel this off because we're going to get to the other side of it where God has God, and I'm just using that in quotes.
Sure.
Not your God, not the good God that I think you're talking about, but God has been very damaging to people in their lives. What's different about your podcast, there are podcasts out there that are queer people talking about religion. It's usually from a negative point of view. It's from a point of view of abuse. You guys are unabashedly celebrating Christianity. And it's fun to listen to podcast after podcast. So I'm a new fan, so I listen to I don't know how many episodes one after the other. Number one, it's fun to see your evolution as podcast hosts. Because you guys obviously are best friends. You guys gel so much. But to see how the conversation is now a real educational tool to things that most Christians don't know the Bible. Most Christians don't know some of the facts behind.
That's the thing. I think what you're really talking about, like when you talk about the mean God, I mean, definitely God has been brutal in the Bible. But I certainly think that the organized religion is the problem.
Right.
It's people who are using God as a weapon, and we can see that these same
Which
so-called
almost every religion, not faith, every religion, structured religion, has done in some form or the other.
Absolutely, and I think what we're dealing with now with the far right and the that we call them Christians with a hard R, like what they're using God as like this weapon against people, against immigrants, against so many different things that not the teachings of Jesus Christ and not the teachings that are in the Bible. So it's for us. We just kind of I think some of the things that cracked our head open were that in 1949 was the first time that 1946 was the first time homosexual was added into the Bible. When they talk about Joseph in the Technicolor Dreamcoat, the original translation was actually a Ketinet Pasim, which was a princess dress. So Joseph might have been genderqueer or a trans person of color.
Well, even the idea of spirit, or the Hebrew, there's this non-gender conforming pronoun used for like spirit.
Yeah.
In terms, even the idea of God, he was made. We were made in his image. Well, that's male and female. That's
Right.
two genders in his image, in their image.
Right,
whatever.
and often people, when we say he, like with the capital H is like a pronoun for God, a lot of people think that we're talking about a male gender, but in actuality, the capitalized he was actually ye, and it is a pronoun that is non-gender, it's genderless. So like a lot of so these are these are perspectives that aren't told to queer
I
people.
need some more already.
Yeah, so like if you think that God if God doesn't transgender, then not transgender, transcend gender,
Yeah.
then you don't really understand God.
And it wouldn't make sense that God would be a certain gender because he's not.
God is beyond gender. God is
Right.
beyond our comprehension. Once we start to project our ideas and definitions of this is who you are, God, you've already lost who God is. You've started to put God in a box. And the divine is so much bigger than that. And I would say that we aren't here to promote Christianity per se,
Right.
but we're here to promote the liberation of God, that the sacrifice that was exemplified by Christ is a liberation that is available to us all. And my personal belief is that that liberation is available to you no matter what walk of life you come from or what religion you come from. You can find that through Buddhism. You can find that through Hinduism. You can find it through any
Absolutely.
religion.
Or just the lessons and teachings and proverbs. Why can't we have access to that?
Yeah.
Why are we?
It's the access that's cut off.
Yeah,
to
they're gatekeeping
Yes.
us from this kind of knowledge, and when there's so many queer stories, like just a few more things, like every time
Every religion has these queer stories, by the way.
every straight
Yes.
every straight wedding you ever went to where they read from the Bible, they're either reading a covenant of love between two men, David and Jonathan, or two women, Ruth and Naomi. There's no covenant of love
Let's talk
between
about
man
David. I
and
think we
woman.
all have a crush on David.
We love
Let's
David.
Talk about
sing.
David.
He was like, "I'll sing
His
our
hard
baby."
body.
Yeah, David's really hot. The story of David and Jonathan. I mean, that if you want to talk about the nail in nailing the nail on the head, like of why I wanted to do this, is because that's a beautiful gay love story that's in the Bible. That and that same Bible that tells me that gay love story is the Bible that drove me to conversion.
So here's the thing for both sides, and we got this in many different forms of questions. From both sides, you can't just pick and choose what you want from the Bible to live your life or support. And that goes for the gays can't just pick out the queer stories and the Jesus sayings, which he never once talked about it. But then for the side that's homosexuality is wrong because Leviticus says this and this, it's like, well, you can't just pick that out either.
No, but we do separate Leviticus because Leviticus was a message for that specific time.
Yes.
There is so many things in Leviticus that we do not practice today.
Like we eat shellfish. We
Mix silk and cotton.
Yeah, I'm wearing
We touch
cotton
football, and it's from pigskin.
Exactly. So
Very
like
Premarital sex. We've had divorce. We've been widowed.
We are in agreement. That Leviticus is out of the question. Leviticus is an almanac for that
But
time.
you can't just say that if
But we
your religion says the Bible is our source.
But it's not a religion. It is our religious leaders that are misusing the interpretations.
There's
how do we
historical
change that?
context. There's historical context that is not taken into consideration. Evangelical Christians today make the mistake of taking the Bible literally and not applying historical context. The book of Leviticus is a book of laws that were written for the Jews that were living amongst the Samaritans at the time and losing their identity as the Jewish people. And so they said, we see that they are doing these things. We will not do these things because this is who we are. So therefore, the book of Leviticus, the book of laws, was written.
Imagine a book of law that was written for the time of quarantine that then someone
Exactly.
thousands of years from now is saying this is how we need to live every day. We need to spray our groceries down with Lysol.
It's like the book of sex or the book of dating that was written in 1947 by this woman for etiquette. It's like, the woman shall pass a piece of cheese to show her love, whatever. You know what I mean? But it's
Yes.
like that. And you told a story about people passing around the Snickers bar, and it's like, you want to be used. That hit home because in all my Catholic teaching, even through high school, didn't have sex education. What we had was this woman with the teased out hair, and this ridiculous, like, puffy paint sweatshirt. And she was there to talk about sex ed, and she had blocks, and she had the male and female blocks. And she's like, look, we were in 7th grade, by the way, when she taught this. And it's so vivid in my head. I can smell the chalk in the classroom. I can see her outfit. I can see every aspect of this woman. And it was the male and female puzzle pieces fit. The male and male puzzle pieces do not fit.
Oh, no, trust me, they do.
Yeah. And
Quite well.
over
And
and over
God
and over
put
and
a
over and over
G-spot
again.
there, by the way.
Amen.
Thanks, God. How many of the LGBTQ community are actually talking about religion as a positive?
Well, Go ahead.
I would just like to touch one more thing
Yeah,
on Leviticus. The specific passage that you were talking about, because this frees a lot of people, so I'd like to mention it. It was a comment on Greco-Roman culture. It was a comment about how Roman soldiers were taking young boys in.
Homosexuality was a huge part of Roman culture.
Right.
That's fact. That's historical. Historical fact.
So when it said one man lies with another, really what it was talking about was like one man lying with a young boy. That
Yes.
is what was elite.
Which is such. Sorry.
Yeah. No, so it's important to identify that, because a lot of times when it gets screwed or it gets misconstrued, like the story of David and Jonathan, which is like this incredible like love story, like I said, when it's told at weddings often to like refer to the best man. His love was more than that of a woman. Look at how close you are, you brothers or best men. And sure, that perspective is valid, but let's go to other perspectives. Like they don't give us our queer perspectives.
And this also goes to the discussion of homosexuality in terms of pedophilia. We know that priests in the Catholic Church are accused of pedophilia. We're talking about young boys. We're not talking about homosexuality.
Right.
It's a
Right.
whole different class. It's
Right.
We're not talking about a committed love between two people.
Right.
Right.
But now, to answer your other question, how many gays are talking about this in a nice way? I think they are with their families. I think they are privately at church. I think that coming out as Christian, as a gay, is another coming out that you're forced to do.
Well, and the Merit Foundation, based out of Chicago, also did a survey amongst the LGBTQ community, and they found that 85% of our community come from faith backgrounds. So, are they having conversations that are positive about faith? Probably not, because a lot of the experiences are not positive. But the majority of us come from that background, and some of us, I would like to think the majority of us can also carry this sense of home within our faith, and have this sense of wanting to come back to it, or find an essence of it. And in that sense, I think that
It's my personal belief that queer people exist to take care of all the unwanted children in the world. I mean, what if it's an answers to prayers? What if these Christians who are praying for children in Africa and children all over the world that need homes, that don't have homes, they're the same ones that are voting against gay adoption? So what's the more Christian option here? Like two people who have more love to give that want to take in a child and like take care of it, or someone who's condemning them from happening and wanting to keep a child in the system?
What I love about your show, whether I believe or not, is you have people write in as what they're asking for prayer for.
Yeah, prayer request.
Prayer Fest. We also hear drag queens on your show offering their prayer. And so there is a portion of the queer community, but I think that portion is also afraid of being persecuted, which is so weird to me. By having a positive experience with religion that we keep quiet. It's not cool. It's also like the sober community and the LGBT community. We haven't really talked about them or celebrated them until the last few years because they become more vocal. It's like, I can be part of this community just because I'm sober doesn't mean I can't party like you or I can't participate like you.
absolutely.
Why are you looking at me that way?
Because you're sober?
Yeah, because we in the gay community, like, oh, sober, then don't invite them. They're not going to be out in the
Yeah,
nightlife.
I get
like
what
a
you're.
Christian gay is like.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
I get what you're saying. There is some parallel there, that sober people, are not celebrated or part of the party,
Right.
if you will.
Where it's like, oh, they're part of.
Yeah,
Woo-hoo.
don't invite them.
Exactly.
And same for the people of faith. Don't invite them. They're just going to want to talk about it, or whatever. But
I mean, can you imagine us like going to one of our gay Sunday fun days, like Mickey's, and all being like, "Hey, do you guys want to read from the Bible?" I mean, how we that would literally stop a record, and
You
people
would be
never invite
surprised.
you.
You would be
Again.
surprised the places we end up bringing it up. That's a little awkward. One thing I said to myself is I'll never deny God. Like, I don't care if I'm in the middle of sex.
Well, if you're a believer, you don't.
Yeah. Well, I don't care if I'm in the middle of sex. If someone brings it up, I'll be like, yes. Like,
Who's bringing? Are you
There's been a very awkward. God's
in
funny.
the middle of sex? Somebody's bringing up.
It was me, Alex. No, I'm just kidding.
You're like, can we talk?
No, God is funny where you don't know where the conversation is going to happen or where there is someone that needs to have a talk about something or, needs a little support.
And it doesn't always have to be so literal, like let's read the Bible or let's have a prayer.
Yeah.
Like what is the Spirit moving you towards? What is the posture of your heart right now? Where is your heart right now? That's also a spiritual conversation that involves the divine and the Spirit as well. The conversation can be had in many ways.
In my growing up, I can't tell you how many people that were in my family circle would go to Mass every single day, pray 2 rosaries every single day, one in the morning, one in the evening, and they were the most horrible people I've ever met. And we know that just because you do certain duties does not change the fact.
Yeah,
that
a lot of people think it's
say that.
it's like a etch-a-sketch that like by saying a prayer they could erase their history.
Okay, so we're going to talk about both your experiences with conversion therapy, but before we get to that point, I want to know about your childhood upbringing in religion. Was it family environment? What was the church environment like? What were you raised at before it kind of took a dark end?
My parents got saved during the Jesus movement. I grew up with my mom leading worship. My dad was praying every single day the same prayers. He still has these prayers written down on a piece of paper that are tattered and torn, 40 plus years old. He prays in the same fluctuation at the same points of the prayer. I grew up in a very religious home. We did not, there was no alcohol, nothing.
Did you guys celebrate like Christmas? And
Oh,
things
absolutely.
Like that?
It was very, we had our birthday celebrations. I grew up Pentecostal.
Got it.
So we believe, my mom always said a church alive is worth a drive. And so we would drive.
Did she make a bumper sticker? I mean, that's some money right there.
All right. We would drive, 40 plus minutes just to get to church.
That's so funny because the gays won't drive to Santa Monica or Glendale. If you move out there, you might as well give it up.
That's true. I live on the east side, so I will not. But
40 minutes, okay.
I mean, I grew up with a family that believed in the Spirit, the movement of the Spirit, and speaking in tongues, the gifts of the Spirit.
That's magical to a young kid, though.
It
and
really
there's a
is.
comfort that this is our Sunday day of family. It's coming home, so to speak.
And we believed that in the same way that God moved in the times of the Bible, that healed the sick and did miracles, that we truly believed that God still responds in this way and interacts with us in this way today. And so that was our position. And so we always went expecting and believing. And so there was always an excitement around that, right?
Somebody speaking in tongues is pretty damn exciting. Do you know how many YouTube videos of hours I spent? I'm like, I believe that one. No, I believe that one. No.
But if mom was mad, you knew she had enough when she broke out in tongues. I remember one time she had it.
Yeah,
she had it with all of us, and she just threw the laundry down and she just started going off in tongues. And we're like, ooh, we better repent. But faith for me growing up was magical. It was exciting.
There was a love there.
There was a love there, and that's and there still is to this day. And I have to thank my parents for that. So that's a little bit of insight into my experience.
I think I had the same. My parents converted from Catholicism to born-again Christianity.
How old were you when
I
that
was
happened?
right before I was born. It was a really big deal. My mom
That is a big deal.
It was a big deal.
Anybody who's Catholic,
Yeah.
Well, my mom wanted to get married in the Catholic Church. She had gone to Catholic school. She wanted to get married in the same church.
You have
And
to.
when she got there, the priest was like, do you go to this church? She's like, what do you mean? I've been going to this church like my entire life, my whole family. Like we all pay tuition, all through from like elementary to high school. And he's like, well, I don't see your name on the collection plate here. And so my dad was like, how much do you need? We'll write a check, blah, blah, blah. My mom was like, no. And I think that was like the end of it for them.
Yeah.
Like that's what it was really gone down to, that my mom had put so much of her life into that church.
She found out it's a country club.
It was a country club.
Yeah.
That's like the most perfect description. Just to share from my experience, my grandma passed away 3 years ago. She devoted her life to Basilica Mission San Juan Capistrano. That's where I was baptized. That's where my uncle was married. That's where my mom had her graduation. My grandma raised so much money over the years for the build of their new church. Her name is literally chiseled on the side of the baptismal font. When she died, her funeral had to be there. That's where our whole family's life was.
Right, yeah.
That same exact thing. Well, we don't see your family, and her donation stopped 2 months ago. It's
Oh
like,
my
yeah, she died.
Oh, my goodness.
After 20 years of her own giving from Social Security, whatever, not to mention all the years of service that I literally dragged the priest over. I'm like, that's her name. It was one of the ugliest things I've ever
She felt
ever
that way
been a
too.
part
And
of.
she had a girlfriend who was, I guess, like a wild child of like the 70s, just like, totally sexually free and doing so much drugs and partying all the time, who had found some kind of like balance in a church and had, maybe had calmed down and had become like, and she saw a change in her. So she started going to her church and she felt God there. She felt like a good presence there. And she talked to her priest about it. Not the head priest that had that conversation, but another one. And she said, my soul is in your hands. I feel God here and I don't feel God here. What should I do? And he was like, you go where you feel God. Like, you know, so my parents went there. Of course, it drove my immigrant Italian grandparents insane.
Yeah.
And they stopped speaking to them. And my parents, my mom had a miscarriage. And they said, where's your God now? And my mom said, you'll see, he's going to give me a special baby, whatever. And when I was born, they named me Daniel with no middle name because Daniel means God is my judge. And I was sort of like a political statement. And my mom's like, look at you. You're famous. You have a podcast where you talk about God. You do all this other stuff. Like, God did give me somebody, you know. So my life, I guess, like, purpose has always been to sort of fulfill this thing.
Let's talk about conversion therapy because we got a lot of questions. I didn't know that you had gone through that. Obviously, I knew through the stories and the interviews you've given that you kind of walked out.
Yeah.
I didn't realize how many people have been affected by conversion therapy.
More than 700,000 in the
And
US
more than you
alone.
would
That's
know.
insane.
Yeah, more than you would know.
You know, we'll see like a Lifetime movie about it, or we'll see
We
this
hear about it all the
traumatic
time. People
movie.
come out to us all the time.
Yeah, I can imagine, and that's why we got so many questions. So if you can share a little bit about how old you were, and how you survived that. Are there any takeaways that you got from that?
I'll say that it's all different ages. Everybody has a different story. Conversion therapy can
For
be
you,
all
though.
different types of things. Yes.
Yeah.
Azzy's was way more intense, which is why I'll let him tell you his. For me, mine was a therapist. I thought I was going to a Christian therapist. We didn't have a name for conversion therapy. So I was just looking for some sort of way to deal with the feelings that I was feeling. And instead I got somebody who alienated me from my allies and, you know, tried to, you know, convince me to go otherwise. And then one day when I was sort of like, there's a really great scene between Dr. Phil and Medea in Medea Goes to Jail, where Dr. Phil's like, so why do you act this way? And Medea's like, why do you act this way? And he's like, well, I just want to know about you. Well, I want to know about you. Like, I kind of did the same thing, and I like tortured him. And he was really gay, and I just needed like a diagnosis. I was like, well, here's a gay Christian that's going to tell me if I'm gay or not. And he was like, you're not gay. And I was like, oh, what a relief. And then he goes, what are you so worried about? And I'm like, going to hell. And he's like, you're not going to go to hell. And he got so mad, and he broke. And he was like, you could be sucking a dick, and the next coming of Christ could happen, and you're going to go to heaven. And I was like, really? And then I went out that night and lost my virginity and never went back. That's my version. I was in for 6 months, but Aziz could tell you what he went through. It was...
And I think it is and like Catholic or Christian, when you're raised in that, it's like our dream is to not be gay anymore.
Right.
We don't want to be like, God's so gonna love you. We want to be straight.
Also, now that there's so much nuance that we're learning, there's so much in the spectrum. You know, I think I was bi-romantic but homosexual, so I was able to completely fall in love with a woman.
Say that again.
Bi-romantic but homosexual. I was able to fall in love with a woman. I felt the love for her, and I wanted to give her everything. I just didn't want to have sex with her. You know, and I could even make out with her. It just didn't get to the point where, like, I think my sexuality stopped at that point, because truly when I love someone, when I feel like I really love someone, it's a man, and, you know, I want to put myself inside of them.
So in high school, I was known as the womanizer because I was acting different, but because I would get to that point, it'd be like, okay, first, second, third base, and then I was done because I didn't have that emotional connection. So I go through girl, because you'd have to go to the dances, you'd have to keep up that, whatever. It's like, no, I wasn't a womanizer, obviously.
Yeah, I was like the romantic piner. I'd go for the girl that had the boyfriend, or the girl who had like a bad experience getting drunk last year and then didn't want to have sex again, or
Or who
the
was
one-
our
who a
co-star in musical theater.
virgin. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, just the one who was like not gonna let it go all the way, you know? And then it wasn't until I got this one girlfriend that like we had gone out for 3 times, and she was like, I can't believe we haven't had sex yet. And I was like, oh my God. I was like, I'm in trouble.
Yeah.
Like, this is going to have to happen soon.
Yeah.
Where's that third number come from, by the way? It's like just always
Right.
been there. Third number.
I mean, it's the rule of 3, right? It's in comedy. It's in speech. You know, good speech writing. You know, it's the rule of 3. I think it's just ingrained in us inherently. But mine started at the age of 13. My parents set up this meeting with our pastor.
So they had feelings. Did you know yourself?
Oh, I've always known. There was never a question. I mean, sometimes my only solace in life as a kid that gave me comfort was imagining that I was being held by another man in bed. You know, like sleep when I was, you know, in bed at night. In between praying, God deliver me. You know, like
I mean, I didn't have this realization until I was in college. I didn't know what feelings I was having. I never put gay with it. And for you to know early on.
Oh yeah. I remember the moment that I was like, I know that I want another man, but also knowing that that was not allowed and feeling that that was not an option. And so when I was 13, my parents set up a meeting with our pastor, and I thought it was like the pastor just wanted to meet with me and say, you are on the right path. Good job, Azariah. Keep walking with the Lord. But no, she told me the story about a man that she saw on the news who was molested as a boy and then grew up to molest other boys. And then she looked at me and she said, Azariah, my eyes are on fire. And in Pentecostalism, everything is very abstract. And so I felt like she was saying to me, like, I can see through you. I can see that you're a homosexual. And I knew I didn't want to be like that man that she saw on the news. So I confessed that I was gay and that I wanted deliverance. And so she knelt down beside me and tried to cast the demon of homosexuality out of me. Demons, it was more than one.
I need their names.
It was a legion.
And numbers.
And that went on once a week for the next 5 years till I was 18. Because I really believed that I could change. And I really tried. But what I know the truth is now is that I am loved, I am beloved, and that God does not have any desire to change who I am, but he designed me perfectly, and that I can walk into the truth of who I am without shame.
Thank you for sharing that, because I can't even imagine how traumatic that must have been, especially during the most formative years of our lives.
Yeah.
And so the question that I got, again, many different ways, is for both of you, is how are you able to love God, to love the idea of faith when you've been through this? And I know we can say, oh, you have to separate God from whatever, but it's all fueled behind this idea of religion. And what do you subscribe to today in terms of what religion or where you get your faith?
I personally wouldn't have made it through that time without God. Like, God was with me through that. Isn't that weird? Like, because it wasn't, because people could tell me one, it's the same way as okay, this is a good example, I guess. My conversion therapist was telling me that my mom, the reason that I was having these feelings is that my mom was too open about sex with me. My mom's version of sexual education was like, Mom, what's a blowjob? And she's like, if you're old enough to know, you're old enough to ask. And she'd be like, she would say, if I tell you right now, you're going to think it's really gross, but when you're older and people love each other very much, you'd actually think it's something that's nice that you would do,
I love that.
with your partner, So,
Yeah.
like, and then I'd be like, okay, if that was enough, it was enough. But then if I was like, well, what is it? She would explain, And so when I was explaining this in therapy, he was telling me that my mom was too open about sexuality with me, and she was the reason that I was having all of these feelings, and I should alienate myself from her. So so for 2 months I didn't speak to my mom, and that's the only time in my life that my mom and I were close. And my mom is like my greatest ally. I mean, she's what my comedy's about. I do one-woman shows as her. I mean, really, we're super close. You can't tell me anything about my mother. Like that, I know who my mother is. So you can't tell me anything about the Father. Like, I know who God is to me. So it doesn't matter if it was my pastor telling me something, or if it was this conversion therapist, or if it's a gay who is like really anti-religion that wants to say something to me. I know who God is in my life. I know who God is in my life. And the thing that I find so sad, the reason I do this work is because I feel like when gays are told that they can't have God, we're not breaking any commandments by being gay, by the way. Like, and I feel like the 10 commandments are really like the center of the religion. Like, we could all agree, thou shalt not kill,
Well,
I mean, honey, I can slay an outfit given enough hours.
I'm saying, you know what I'm saying. However, I feel like then it becomes sort of like a weird blurring line when people want things like the death penalty, right? Mm-hmm. Or even abortion, whatever. Like the same people that are fighting for one thing are fighting for another. It's kind of odd. Personally, like I feel like because of that same reason, gays find some other place to channel the energy, to channel for a leader, and they end up looking towards like some pop diva or like money or sex or clothing. You
talked about this in one of the episodes. Yeah. I found it very interesting. Or they're at the gym for 12 hours a day. Like, that's their God.
And the gym is their God, or the gym is their church, or the gym is their temple. And they find some other sort of devotion. And they've been tricked. They've been misguided, I feel like, and especially the ones who...
You shouldn't have false idols.
You shouldn't have false idols. They're breaking a commandment. And it's interesting to me, when you lose something like that, when you lose your God, what's left? And I hate that gay people feel like that God won't love them. My mom was with me at DragCon, and next to us was the LGBT center. I had shared my table with them so they can get a free table and do some work. And my mom said something about God, and she's like, "Oh no!" One of the guys was like, "God's not for me. God hates me. I'm gay." And my mom was like, "Who told you that? God loves you." And he started crying, and he just needed someone to tell him that. And I think that if I had heard one person, with a celebrity, forget it, but like one person just tell me that God loves me this way, that God made me this way, that's all I needed to hear. And to not feel suicidal, to not feel lost, to not worship some false idol.
Okay, so but to
Like
that
Bette
point, and and here's also where some of the comments come from, and even my own comment is: then where was your God during this persecution? Where was your God during this conversion therapy? If He loved you so much, or if he, she, whatever, then why were you left alone to have to go through this?
God is the still.
Where was God?
God is the still small voice, and when you are so indoctrinated into believing that God hates you, you can't. You're so distracted that this other voice is so loud that you can't hear the still small voice.
Ooh, that's so true.
God is so present in everything and everywhere, and if we were able just to tune in. If we had the tools to tune in, Buddhism, that's what Buddhism taught me. It taught me how to tune into that still small voice.
It's a vibration.
Yes.
And Buddhism hasn't even made a statement about gay, gender, whatever. They're just like, be.
Yes.
Yes, but we were so distracted that that we weren't allowed, we weren't able to see God. But I was able to break away, and so many of us break away from all of that fucking bullshit.
Yeah.
But God has been present. God has talked to His people. God has performed miracles. God has been there for the persecuted, but not for the gay community.
Oh, God is there.
God,
Absolutely,
yeah.
God is there.
There's spiritual leaders that carried people through the AIDS crisis, that sat
Yes,
sat
the
with
Sisters
people.
of Perpetual Indulgence are the manifestation of God in our community. I really believe, because they have done the
and
ministry
in the details
work to be
and
there.
in work.
Yes.
And in work. We went to Outfest Fusion and saw like all these wonderful people give awards and speeches, Elegance Britton, I believe his name was
Elegance, yeah.
who was this filmmaker. He is this filmmaker who accepted an award. Thanked God for his love with his husband, because he said his husband is his collaborator, and his husband came to him, and he never thought that something like that was going to be there for him. I mean, he grew up homeless on the streets of Christopher Street, and was able to find God in his love. And I think that that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
When so many people don't think that those things go together, that their partner won't be blessed by a union like that. But honestly, it's amazing to have a partner that you could pray with, or have some. I mean, I've had people like that in my life.
For me, I feel like when the first night of my conversion therapy, 98 Degrees was performing close by.
Oh my God! What? I mean, you're like, I don't know what to do.
Follow me here. Follow me here. Follow me. 98 Degrees was performing.
Maybe that was God's little joke. Like, hang on, there's 98 degrees
God's
right
got
over
a
there.
lot of little jokes.
And I really feel that looking back. And in this conversation, I feel that my love for 98 Degrees and my infatuation for Nick Lachey, that is no longer there, but was there at the time.
You wouldn't kick him out of bed for eating crackers.
I feel like that was God's little lifeline to me, to have that held closely to myself, that I had only for myself, that no one else knew about. And so while I was sitting there and hearing this message about this guy that my pastor saw on the news, I'm thinking, oh my God, Nick Lachey is taking the stage right now. He's only 50 miles away from me. The love of my life, if you only knew. I had that island within myself that I could go to. That's God. That's God who can provide that island that can transcend your suffering. And for me, Nick Lachey transcended my suffering in the time. So I feel like it's just those small things. It's those small things that can that we can see that God is there, and that's what I see.
So as to challenge this, as a fresh atheist, I see so much just life placed on God, such as Super Bowl. The one team is praying to win, the other team's praying to win. Like, God gives a crap, right? Or is there.
Right.
But also, some of the successes that both of you have had in your career, it's not a blessing by God. It's your hard work.
Yeah, but sometimes when you are at your end of your rope, like those guys in the gym or they're at training, they're reaching to God for strength, like just for something.
But
something
there's
bigger
atheists
than
that also are pulling that from themselves. They're
Yeah.
getting through
Yeah, absolutely.
sexual abuse, mental abuse.
Yeah.
They're getting through that without this idea. And this has been such a conversation. It's like when bad things happen to good people.
Right.
Then that same thing, like if somebody's house gets destroyed, those same people are praying to God to help them through. It's like, well, didn't God destroy that house?
I don't understand really what you're saying.
Like the good and bad is placed in God when it's like sometimes life
Sure,
just happens.
but I think that when you're not placing it on God, you're placing, the same atheists also still have to find some spiritual channel. They'll be like in love with a rock that they charge in the sun, or they'll think like, Stevie Nicks got me through all this, or whoever. Like, I'm just saying, they place it on something else. I feel like God has been in a position where it's undeniable to me. God was described to me by a drunk, crazy woman or angel or whatever in a parking lot in Shreveport, Louisiana. I was filming a movie, and we were getting into the car at Walmart.
This sounds like an amazing scene in a movie, by the way.
We were getting into a car at Walmart, and I think Theo Rossi was in the movie. He was getting into one car, and I was getting into the other car, and this lady was like, talking to him, and he went blah 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 blah, because she was like one of the ones you'd want to stay away from late at night in the Shreveport, Louisiana parking lot of a Walmart. And then she came around to me, and she goes, no, I went blah 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 blah, and he was laughing because I just copied his thing. She goes, you know what I'm talking about? And I go, no, I don't. And I'm trying to get in the car as fast as I can with my groceries. And she's like, I'm talking about God. And like I said, I'll never deny God. And I'm like, yes, I do know what you're talking about. She's like, God's like a new car. And I'm like, you lost me again. And she's like, well, did you ever get a new car? And I said, sure. And she goes, well, when you get a new car, and let's say you got this Prius, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, there it is in red. Oh, there it is in gray. Oh, here it comes. Oh, there's the same one as mine. There's a younger model as mine. And you start to notice it everywhere. It's in the parking lot, just like you. You let the other guy make a left because they have the same car as you. The car was always there. You just weren't enlightened to it. And God is like that. You are like, if you are enlightened to God, God is in everything. That's why they say God is in the details. Like, God is in the opportunity to speak with you right now, to your audience. Like, God is in all these moments.
I have to say again, like this is a very unique episode for us.
Right?
Yeah.
So, and who do we thank for that? Like, so, and I also believe that God is a jealous God. I mean, according to the Bible and all the stuff that you've seen, like, I feel like when people go, oh, please, God, don't let me get a ticket, please, God, and then
Old Testament God is a dick.
yeah.
Like he really is. They really are. I mean,
And then-
it's like, but where does love manifest itself from that? And so many, faiths and religions come from that time and these kind of stories.
Yeah, to finish my thought, though, I feel like if people are like, oh, God, please don't let me get a ticket, and then they go out and they don't get a ticket, they're like, I have great karma. And God's like, karma, bitch, I did that. Okay, now we're going to see. You're going to get a flat tire on the way home, Like, I think that there is some sort of, like, a little bit of, like, God wants credit. If we're made in His image, I feel like God wants credit for a lot of the stuff that the works that are done in our life.
One thing I'm really learning right
It's
now.
a little petty.
Well, one thing I'm learning right
Aren't
now
we
in
all?
my life is that
But God is not us.
Yes, but we are in His image. And you think by image I mean like flesh and bone? No, I think in His spirit. I think we are made in God's spirit, and I think we could choose to follow that path or not. And I think that's a lot of the people that are righteous or whatever, the ones that are like, oh, you can't do this and you can't do that. What they're trying to do is they're trying to make our sin look worse. Like, I think the critics of the LGBT community are trying to make our sin look worse so their sin doesn't.
I mean,
look
how
as
many of
bad.
the Republicans that are making laws against our community have done half of the bad things in the Bible? They're just not our bad things. They're their own bad
How
things.
many of those mean jocks who would like throw up seeing two guys kiss are masturbating to lesbian porn?
Yes, or they're on
just saying,
Grindr discreet and they can't host.
I feel worse for them in that instance.
Well, go to Orange County. It's still, you go to Grindr,
Oh,
it's all chest
yep.
pick. Nobody can host discreet because
yeah.
it's.
Yeah, I
yeah.
love that you point out Orange County. It's so true.
That's where I'm born and raised. That's they still have Trump booths out there. It's so ridiculous. That's also where I was fired from 3 different Catholic churches.
I mean,
Yeah.
Florida too.
yeah,
I mean, I'm in the trenches over there. It's still happening,
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think my personal belief and something that I'm learning more and more about is that nothing is really good or bad. That things just happen. It is life, and that, it's about perspective. So if your house burns down, you can curse God or you can bless God for the new house that you're going to get because you had the right insurance.
That's what the secret's
Or,
about. And I believe the secret, that like the law of attraction, is a gift that God gives us. I believe that that's another thing that God gives us, like that maybe might have been explored in some missing book of the Bible. But like, I truly feel like
Well, there's many missing books of the Bible. Let's just put it out there.
absolutely. I mean, I feel like a huge portion, 13 to 33, we don't know much about Jesus's life, and I feel like part of that is because they didn't want his
Do we?
they didn't want his commentary on Greco-Roman culture to be discussed
And
when
I
they were
think
selling Christianity to the Romans.
In this new age of faith, not just Christianity, but faith, we have to, come to terms that the Bible is not the only authority. Now, evangelical Christians I've lost all of them right now, but that's fine. But the Bible is not the only authority. There are many resources and understandings that we need to come
Also,
to
when we
terms
had Yvette Flounder on our show, and she said the biggest
Oh my
disservice
God, yes.
men have ever done to the Word of God is put a back cover on the Bible.
Yeah.
Just because men were done writing doesn't mean God is done talking.
Well, okay. So
That's right.
Yes. So I have to skip ahead because, to your point, I'm fascinated. What I'm fascinated by with my own formal education is that all the major religions come from the same stories and themes, from kind of the same time period.
Usually break apart at Abraham.
100%. And I've been to the Dome of the Rock, everything.
Yep.
Judaism, Christianity, Islam, eschew homosexuality, non-binary talk. Then you have Hinduism, Shinto, Native American religions celebrate non-binary and fluid identification.
Yeah.
Why are the biggies so afraid of being emasculated? Why is it such a big point? Why is it not being generous the big point? Why?
The stories are in there. That's what we love to do. We like to look at archaeology. We like to look at early translations. Like we like to try to find the perspective, and it's there. There's a great story of Paul talking to a eunuch just after Jesus' death, and the eunuch saying to Paul, like, is there anything that about me that Jesus wouldn't let me be baptized? And he said no. And he said, then baptize me right now in the lake. And he went and did that. What a great affirming story for an intersex person or a trans folk, someone, anyone, that just of the acceptance. But I never heard that story before in church. They don't bring that up.
Right.
They don't talk about it in that way.
Right.
To not tell the story of the Ketzinet Pasim and say that Joseph was wearing a rainbow dress.
A princess dress.
A princess dress. They always say, oh, he was, his brothers were jealous. Well, someone would have left with the coat instead of ripping it up and pouring lamb's blood on it. They don't not telling those perspectives is a disservice to the word. And it's honestly like, we want to make it queer. We want to make it gay. We want to hear it from us.
And it's steeped in the masculine culture that it was built into.
That's what I'm saying. Why is why? What's the fear?
Well, look at right now in the Bible where Lot's wife. What's her name? Just Lot's wife. Like women weren't even respected. It was about land ownership. It was about money,
property,
and that is, and so the masculinity of it all is, I'm a landowner. I'm a man. I'm a person who of value. We don't value women. We don't value gay people. We don't value eunuchs or trans folks or whatever. So it's really toxic masculinity goes down to property value and men and real estate. And ironically, Catholic Church is the number one real estate holder in the world. Where if they were tax exempt, we could solve world hunger. What's more unchristian than that?
And have you ever been to a more boring museum than the Vatican Museum of statue after statue of naked people?
When I was in the Vatican, my mom was like, she was in the Vatican and she said, oh, wow, this is so beautiful. Like, what would it take? Does anyone ever get married here? And they're like, oh, no, you'd have to be someone really special like George Clooney. And my mom was like, oh, so you have to have money.
That's it.
But let's talk about
Country
still.
club.
Like Christianity is very afraid of masculinity. Judaism, of course, we know. But
False Christianity is. Let's label it correctly. False Christianity is that.
We're not spiritual leaders. We don't want to start our own denomination, but basically, like,
that's one of the questions. I was like, well, why don't
I
they
like
start
to call out the bullshit, though.
But
Yeah.
but let's talk about the figure of Jesus.
Yeah.
If the New Testament is so important to Christianity, we still have these weird ideas of what a man is. We know Jesus should have been married. We know he had a great love for his mother.
Might have been with Mary Magdalene.
Might have been, or maybe she was a fag hag. We don't know.
She was also probably a sugar mama. It's believed that she.
Oh, I've never heard. Oh, this excites me.
It's believed that she was a wealthy woman who financed Jesus'
That makes
ministry
sense. How
years.
else were they paying?
Also, she wasn't a prostitute,
Yeah.
Never. Look at your history.
Yes.
Yeah, but people don't. See, the thing that one of the things, and
Immaculate Conception, 1920.
yeah, I think the Catholic Church is probably the most guilty of this. But they often they gatekeep the Bible and say, this is what it means, this is what it is. Do not question it.
Yep.
Here it is for you.
Yep.
And that
They
is not.
deleted history from our faith.
Yes, and the Bible itself is a reflective text. It's meant for you to hold it. It's meant for you to wonder about it. We don't call it Bible studying. We call it Bible wondering. It's meant for you to hold it and figure it out. It's not meant to be told by not even by us, by no one. Like, if you like these stories or the ideas or these or these things, then go. We're just giving you a perspective of how to look at it.
100%.
So we're like a cliff note in a way. Like, but you can go. We want you to go and look for yourself. You'll find it.
There's so much research, especially now with educators really focusing on this with the internet. There's so much education and research.
That's
out
what it
there.
is. It's the information age. It's the fact that we are able
Yes.
to get access to this right now.
Yep.
I could find these stories on TikTok and on Instagram and on YouTube and on our podcast.
And
places
verify
like
your
that.
sources, kids.
And people are going to freak out
too.
because you're going to see there's going to be a huge shift in Christianity in the next like 20 years because
Absolutely.
we are in a place right now where you thought we just wanted our marriage equality. We want our friggin' God back.
Pat Robertson, your time's up.
But do you remember when we were being raised and they're like, every old priest would come in or pastor, whatever, would be like, Jesus was the original rebel. He was the cool guy because he got mad in a temple once. But if we
Yes.
look at the
Not just
Gnostic,
that, though.
but no, that's what I'm saying. If we looked at the Gnostic Gospels, you know, Jesus was supposed to be human and God, so he would have been more flawed than what we are led to believe. The way that
He
we
was
all
fully
are.
human. He was a sexual being too. But you know, like Jesus
And
was
if he-
And he
not
had an
just a
ego at
rebel.
some points.
Jesus was not just a rebel of his time. Check out this book called Jesus in the Third Way, written by Walter Winkler, I believe his name was. It's only about 90-some pages. But Jesus, when he said turn the other cheek, Jesus was not teaching us to be passive. Jesus was teaching us to stand up and to demand that our humanity be recognized.
To not back away. It's like,
Exactly,
you come at me, I'm not
because-
going away.
Because
That's
again,
interesting.
historical context, when you understand that the left hand is considered unclean in Jewish culture and that they would smack you with the back of their right hand, and Jesus said turn the other cheek, it would force them to smack you with their left hand, they would have to pause for a moment and realize that, oh, I can't do that. And again, when Jesus said, go the extra mile, at the time, the Roman soldiers could command people to carry their baggage for a mile, but Jesus said, go the extra mile. And so Jesus was saying, demand that they see your demand that they recognize your humanity. And so Jesus was not just was a rebel also in that sense. You know, he was.
But he also said some controversial stuff. He also had an ego. He also was this.
He was
flawed
fully human
because he was
fully
both.
human. Absolutely.
Anyway, I love talking about this. We're gonna give a little levity to this because we got so many questions about you being a TV evangelist. I find that so fascinating because I'm such a nosy bitch. I would watch TBN hour after hour because of
Really?
Janice Crouch, of course.
Yes, Janice.
I remember still, and I was this.
You know, she only loved to communicate by fax. And if she liked something, she would put a heart around it and then fax it back to you.
I remember like it was yesterday, and I remember seeing it on big TV. That's how many years ago when I was this little kid. And she, the music started, and she had probably 4 wigs that
yeah.
were
Purple.
pink. Yeah.
Yeah.
And she told a story about one of her neighbors. There was a dead mouse on her porch, and she oh, there she is.
She's kind of
bless.
fierce.
And then, so she scooped up the mouse, and she just started praying, and Janice just burst into tears telling the story. And it was almost a 45-minute long story about this goddamn
Yeah,
mouse
she was a rambler. Yeah.
that Jesus cried and whatever, and then the mouse got up and it lived, and she's like, now send in your money. And I was just like,
Yeah.
that's it, because there was so much drama there. You
What
as a
did she
gay
say?
man,
Shouldn't she say something to you?
It wasn't to me. It was to my friend.
I want all the tea.
Okay.
You worked on the remix. Obviously, with all these outfits, you couldn't have been the only queer person there.
No.
But I want to know, what was
No.
the reality of working at the remix, kind of knowing what you were, because as a gay man, I'm just like,
Oh, girl, I kept my mouth shut. But
Until you
in
could.
all aspects.
until I could. That was the after hours. No, but I had a friend. His aunt ran the Nashville studios, and he was gay, and he lived in the Conway Twitty house on the property of the Nashville TBN studios. And he was
That's
Jan's
insane to me.
he was Jan's personal assistant anytime she was in town.
But it's like a city.
It's its
whole
own
city.
little campus, its own little
Celebration Orlando.
They had one in
Exactly.
Orange
Very
County
that.
that until a few years ago was its own little
And
compound.
Park,
Yes.
and Park La Brea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They the one in Orange County,
It was
Anaheim.
lit up. It was like Christmas every day. It's like,
Very.
who's paying that bill?
Yeah.
Janice's dead mouse.
Yeah, she But so he was Jan's personal assistant anytime she was in town, and he felt like he needed to come out to her. Because he was nervous that if she
Like she
found out
didn't
other
know.
ways, right? He was obviously, he was family, so he felt he needed to come out to her, and so he did. He said, "Jan, I want to let you know from myself that I'm gay." And she goes, "Oh, honey, if all of the gay men at TBN quit, TBN would shut down." Those are Jan's words.
Well, and look where they are now.
Yeah.
But isn't that funny, the hypocrisy of her being on screen for a network, making so much money from a network that believes a certain way? And what I want to know from you is how you work through having your family with Remix, coming out, kind of knowing what was going to happen, but then maybe thinking, and I don't know how you felt, so I want you to kind of talk us through, but kind of thinking, maybe this is going to make a change. As somebody that was told to leave 3 different Catholic churches, not at your level, obviously, but my family for 13 years, that is so damaging to somebody. This is why we have suicide rates in LGBTQ community.
Agreed.
Can you walk us through about what made you decide to finally come out, and then that kind of limbo area where you expected that knock at the door or that phone call that, okay, you're done?
Well, like anyone, I had to reconcile first with myself that God loves me just as I am. I had to feel that. I had to know that.
If you don't mind, so where do you draw that from? Do you draw that from Scripture? Do you draw that from your own feeling?
From research. So I watched a documentary called For the Bible Tells Me So. I had been going to a gay affirming church for quite some time, and I had heard this affirming gospel over and over again. But when I watched this documentary called For the Bible Tells Me So, I finally grasped it. It finally clicked for me. All of that years of indoctrination finally took the back seat. And I finally heard and believed that God loves me just as I am. And then I just knew I couldn't continue living this lie, that I couldn't continue with this career in Christian entertainment without others knowing this truth, because in the same way that I needed to be liberated, others need to be liberated. And no one else had done this at this point in time. And so I came out publicly, and that went viral online.
I remember.
And so then I went on the Soul Force Equality Ride and all of that. But I did my research. I got involved in the community. I asked questions, and then I discovered the truth, and the truth was so liberating. So I hope that answers your question.
But can you speak more about kind of that also shock when your family left you and were like, you're no longer part of this? That's depressive no matter what your beliefs are. That has to be so devastating. And so how do you work for that? Because I know, especially during COVID, how many youth were kicked out of their house? How many people have come to the realization that their family is no longer there for them?
Look at the stories on Drag Race. There's so many on Drag Race.
Yeah.
Oh, God, that's so interesting you said that, because usually at the finale, all the families would be there. This season is a little scary because we don't have that big family unit. We actually talked about that recently.
Well, I want to give credit where credit is deserved. And, my parents did not disown me, thankfully.
Yeah.
They did say and do hurtful things. But that's just because they are working with what they have. And therapy has taught me that and allowed me to be at peace with that, and has allowed me to love them where they're at. So my parents didn't do the best job, but they did the best that they could.
Yeah.
And